ELISE guidance on location data privacy. So first, for those who don't know about ELISE, ELISE stands for European Location Interoperability Solution for e-government, and it's an action of the part of the ISA2 program. It's providing cross-border and cross-sector interoperability solution for public administration, businesses, and citizens. In the ISA2 action, there are 54 different actions actually tackling interoperability from different angles, whereas ELISE is the only one among them focusing on the location dimension as a driver for enabling the digital government transformation. Within this context, ELISE knowledge transfer activities, as you can see on the next slide, are organizing periodically webinars, different kind of webinars, whose aim are to engage in an agile way with the topics which are relevant for digital transformation, by harnessing the use of location data and technology sharing, showcasing and promoting the consolidated result of ELISE action activities. So the latter will be actually the focus and the aim of today's webinar, in which our speakers will guide us through the topic of location data privacy. So actually showing how recent initiatives dealing with the personal data protection resulting to GDPR legislative framework are seen through the eyes of the location data, supported as well by the different ELISE activities. So today we have with us Massimo Pedroli, senior consultant, and Gabriele Di Nillo, senior expert in location data privacy, and Ilenia Pia Viceconti, also senior expert in location data privacy, all three coming from Deloitte. So they will cover today following topics, as you can see on the next slide. So at the beginning, try to explain, so what is personal data? We'll look at personal location data and how does it relate to the location data privacy. Following by the, let's say, why location data is important for me as a user. So that will be presented through different user journeys as trying to explain through different personas in different situations why this is important. That will be followed by ELISE guidance on the location data privacy. So as mentioned, the activities through which ELISE has contributed to this topic, and ended by the conclusions and main takeaways. So this is the first part. In the second part, which will also be following after the presentation part, there will be questions and answers. For these, actually we invited different experts that will share with us their views and experience, as well as challenges and potential future developments needed in this domain. So I wish you very exciting 75 minutes of this webinar, and I'm asking now Massimo Pedroli to take the floor. Please, Massimo.
Thank you, Simon. Thank you all for joining us today. Basically, I will pass immediately the floor to my colleagues who will start introducing the topic relating to personal location data and how it applies and relates to location data privacy. Ilenia and Gabriele.
Yes. Okay. I'm Gabriele Di Nillo. Thank you very much. The first section of this webinar is focused on the following question. What is personal location data and what is the relationship between personal location data and location data privacy? As you know, the General Data Protection Regulation, GDPR, has been effective in the entire European Union since May 25, 2018. The GDPR impacts many areas of an organization and public administration, such as legal and compliance, technology, and data. In particular, the GDPR introduced new requirements and challenges for legal and compliance functions, Many organizations will require a data protection officer who will have a key role in assuring compliance. For the technology dimension, new requirements will mean changes to the ways in which technologies are designed and managed. In terms of data, having a better grasp of what data is collected and where it's stored will make it easy to comply with new data subject rights. Finally, the GDPR introduced a new maximum monetary penalty of 4% of annual global turnover that can be imposed in case of serious non-compliance. Taking into account this principle, these requirements, and the concern that will arise with introduction of the GDPR, we will find answers to this common question around personal location data and location data privacy. Which information is to be considered personal location data? How can make sure the personal location data I'm collecting is compliant with the regulation? In other words, how can I demonstrate I'm complying with the regulations? I need to update or create policies that set out how my organization processes personal data. Moreover, how can I give confidence to users of my app to trust the way I handle their location data? In other words, should I consider other compliance measures such as minimize the processing of the personal data, give individuals greater control and visibility, and apply suitable security measures? And finally, how can I minimize the risk to incurring some violation of privacy law when treating location data? I give you an interesting information. An immediate change of an introduction of the GDPR is greater public awareness of data protection, evidenced by a surge in individuals seeking to exercise their rights under the GDPR and increasing activism by privacy groups. So, based on this consideration, the main element to allows you to address the answer to this question is principle related to the context in which the question is asked. Please, next slide. The GDPR is the first piece of EU data protection regulation to mention location data explicitly, but with no clear-cut legal definition. In this instance, we use the definitions of personal data and location data defined in the European Union legal framework. So, what is personal data? We use the definition provided by the GDPR Article 4. Personal data means any information relating to an identified or identifiable natural person, the data subjects. An identified natural person is who can be identified directly and or indirectly, in particular by reference to an identifier such as name, number, location data, online identifier, etc., etc. And what is location data? The definition includes any data with an implicit or explicit geography or geospatial reference, ranging from address data to radio signal-based triangulation or IP address location. So a broad view of location data has been taken to encompass many scenarios as possible. At the intersection, what is the personal location data? The personal location data is any location data directly or indirectly linked to a living individual, or that can be directly or indirectly used to identify a living individual. It's necessary to underline that the GDPR only applies to living people or data subjects. It does not apply to the dead or the organization. In other words, organizations do not and cannot have personal information rights under GDPR. However, the personal information of the employee of an organization, for example, is protected by GDPR. The figure shows the three areas of consideration. On the left, the personal data, on the right, the location data, and the intersection. In taking this broad approach, it's important to draw a distinction between data that has location information and data that could have personal location information when combined with other data. It may be that in the combining of data set, the location data becomes personal information. Please, next slide.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Ilenia. Gabriele told us about the importance of personal data and location data, but how privacy protection takes into account personal location data. According to the Guideline for Public Administration on Location Privacy, published by European Union in 2020, location data privacy is the individual's right not to be subjected to unauthorized collection, aggregation, processing and distribution, including selling of his location data. It is the right to be protected by the ability to conceal information of whereabouts, which can be derived from personal location data. Next slide, please. In the following table, we have some example of personal location data, but first of all, we need to answer to this question. Does the location data allow identifying an individual? If yes, we are talking about personal location data. Let's take some example. If we collect telephone subscription account information linked to the smartphone and we combine this type of personal data with GPS coordinates of the location of a smartphone, so we have personal location data. At the same time, if we collect internet subscription account information with public IP address or realty owner information with cadastral information with a realty, or license plate owner information with traffic footage on specific location, we have personal location data. So if we combine these two types of data sources, personal data and location data, the location of the individual can be identified. If we go back to the previous question, does the location data allow identifying an individual? And if we answer yes, it is very important to determine why, so the purpose and how the means data is processed. If you can do this, you are the data controller and you must confirm legitimacy, clear definition, legal compliance of data processing. If you can't determine why and how data is processed, you are the data processor and you must ensure safe treatment of data, notify possible breach, and assist controller in ensuring compliance. In this particular historical context, there are new multiple privacy risks, especially when processing personal location data. Governance activities specific to personal location data could be defined. Some examples of specific governance activities are guidelines on how to perform self-check if location data can potentially identify an individual, or adopt a minimum set of security and privacy controls specific to location data that shall be applied when processing location data. For example, how to apply anonymization or pseudonymization technique. And risk assessment process and supporting risk assessment tool focusing on traits specific to location data. Public administration should assess the risks they expose data subject to when processing their location data, and this is not a one-off activity. As risks evolve, the likelihood and impact of these risks should be reassessed regularly. Next to the risk data subjects are exposed to, public administration expose themselves to risk as well when processing personal location data. And the risk of, for example, non-compliance or data leakage, insufficient or ineffective security control should be assessed as well. This risk assessment usually take the form of data protection impact assessment, so a DPIA, or a privacy impact assessment, PIA. Thank you. Next slide.
I will take over from here. Thank you, Gabriele. Thank you, Ilenia. We have chosen to present the subject of personal location data from the point of view of concerned stakeholders that can understand how privacy, location data privacy is relevant for each of them. In order to do this, we have adopted a user journey approach to show how specific stakeholders are understanding how location data privacy is relevant for them and how it impacts their own lives and activities. Which are the challenges and risks to deal with personal location data, and which are the privacy principles that should underline the use and treatment of personal location data. Finally, we will show which is the guidance provided by the ELISE action related to that subject. We have considered user journeys under the perspective of citizens, public administrations, and business. In particular, we have considered 3 user journeys for 4 personas. In the first journey, we will see how a national statistician is confronted with the use of personal location data. In the second journey, we will see how a public local administration officer is dealing with the personal location data, potentially facing challenges in doing so. In the third journey, we will consider jointly the perspective of a citizen, a passenger, in this case, a user of public transports, and a bus service provider, both using and sharing personal location data in the same context. Let's now start with the first user journey. Let's see the point of view of a national statistician. Hannah, a national statistician, works in a national statistical office, in particular in a unit that has been collecting large amount of sensible data for several years. Among those data, there are also personal location data under the definition that was provided before. Hannah's unit is now required to provide some personal data, including personal location data, such as addresses, that are needed for a policy assessment. So they shall be used by a third organization, policy unit in this case, to understand what the impacts of a certain future policy may be. Her unit, Hannah's unit, also decides to subject all collected personal location data to business intelligence processing with the support of some external experts. Hannah is in charge of identifying potential risks of this process in terms of data protection. She's aware of her responsibility protecting citizens' data, and she's looking for guidance. In particular, she's worried about the possible violation of data protection rights of citizens in case the public administration and the director of the other branch of the public administration uses data out of their original scope. The possible unlawful use of the data by external consultants and suppliers, and the risk of re-identifying individuals, even if the data is anonymized. Obviously, this may happen typically when a data set is very granular. For instance, the inclusion of geographic details in a data set makes it much easier to re-identify users who live in small geographic areas. So the more granular the data set analyzed is, the highest the risk of re-identifying individuals, even in case of anonymization is. Which are the privacy principles that should be applied here? Well, we have started mentioning some. First one is to apply data minimization. In particular, HANA shall have to reflect whether a full data set is necessary to achieve the desired outcome, or whether some personal data can be omitted. Another principle to follow is to secure data processing activities by applying security techniques to protect personal location data from unlawful disclosure. ELISE, in some of its guidance documents that we will briefly go through later on, has provided some solutions. HANA, first of all, may have to investigate what the purpose of data usage by the director of the unit she will be supplying those data is. What is the scope of using the data that she will be providing? Does the scope comply with the scope for which they were originally collected? This is the first check that she will have to do. Second activity to perform here is to verify whether and to which extent other parties, for example, the external consultants, will need the full data set, or if only a limited data set out of the available data could be sufficient for the external consultant to perform its contracted activities, business intelligence in this case. Furthermore, she may need to ensure that the correct technical controls and contractual agreements for external staff on non-disclosure and acceptable use are put in place. She would also have to decide if it's appropriate to apply further data anonymization on the personal location data. Finally, as we said, she may consider whether keeping out of the treated data set part of the information and value originally intended for that data set may impair the purpose of the research, or whether by removing part of that information would allow removing part of the risks of dealing with personal location data without necessarily impairing the quality of the research. For example, by reducing the precision and the granularity of geographical areas included in the analysis, by aggregating the smaller ones into larger ones. Let's now go to another stakeholder. We are now considering here a public administration officer, Margot, a local public administration officer. She is working in an office which plans to promote a new service, sending out personalized information brochures to citizens and potential users of this future service. Margot wants to ensure that the data collection will respect all applicable laws and regulations on data location privacy, starting at the EU level, and she's concerned about this promotion plan. Promoting activities can be problematic under GDPR, as it may involve the use or reuse of data collected for one purpose to be used for another purpose. The privacy principles that she would have to comply with in this case is to achieve lawful processing of personal location data, asking for a citizen's explicit consent before using his or her address data for purposes that are different from the originally intended ones. Another key principle to comply with is to allow data subjects' rights, including their rights to withdraw the consent to use data, personal data, for any intended, even originally allowed purpose. In this case as well, ELISE has provided some practical guidance. Following the guidelines provided by ELISE, HANA understands that it should be made clear to the citizen what is happening with his or her own data, personal location data in this case, and why this is happening, including the specific purpose for which the personal data will be used, rather than just relying on general legislation. Under GDPR, possibly this may be risky because personal data held and gathered for one purpose cannot be reused for another purpose. A key aspect here is to take into account that address data is probably the most frequently requested and stored personal location data by public administrations. This principle implies that citizens should not be asked for the same data more than once, with the objective to reduce the administrative burden for the citizens. Furthermore, the public administration officer, Margot in this case, should also make sure that a personal location data protection program is implemented as part of the guidance provided by her office to treat with this case. Let's now take another example. We are now moving to a user journey where we involve two different profiles, two different personas. The first is the CEO of a bus service provider, who's acting as data controller in this case. Martin in particular is the CEO of a bus service provider offering an app which has been developed and managed by a third party to plan trips and get updates on bus status using GPS. He plans to add new functionalities, in particular the integration with social media to save personal information and favorite trips across all users' connected devices. We must point out here that there are specific critical challenges highlighted by surveys and researches on the level of concerns that users and individuals have about the use of their location data and their privacy. Even in cases where these may bring further additional benefits to them. It has been shown from recent surveys, for example, that 84% of contacted and interviewed users are not willing at all to share their physical location data, and 86% of those users are not willing to share their address data. So this intended purpose may conflict with a general trend by users and reluctancy to share their own personal location data. This may actually conflict with the limited trust that users may have in public services using their personal location data. Furthermore, we have to take into account that the limited impact that the action to add this new functionality may have on the application may lead to inadequate data and service quality if the return provided by users to this new functionality is limited. Looking at this perspective from the point of view of a passenger, from a citizen point of view, we see that Tom works downtown and needs to take a bus every day for 40 minutes to reach his workplace. He's considering downloading a mobile app to receive real-time updates on the status of buses and fastest itineraries. He wonders whether to connect his app's account with the social media, but he is concerned, as we were mentioning, about sharing his location and other personal data. The risks and challenges that he faces are related to the inappropriate use of his own personal location data and to the risk of using such data for out-of-scope purposes and the risk that such data be transferred to third parties. How can these possibly diverging interests can be dealt with? The privacy principles to follow are basically to ensure the lawful processing of personal location data, to apply data protection by design and default, starting from the design of the application and making sure that all datasets treated are inherently limited to the strict need of the intended purpose by applying data minimization, therefore, and applying all intended measures to build trusts, reminding that data subjects are also data owners in particular. ELISE has provided, in this case as well, some guidance. It is necessary, first of all, for permission for data collection and making sure that the purpose of the data to be collected is made clear to the user. Making it as simple as possible, for example, by using standardized icons or a simple representation of how the intended data processing would go. A privacy notice should be published in order to make it clear, also in consistent written form, what the intended purpose of data collection would be. Applying data protection by design and default, as we were mentioning before, and data minimization, for example, limiting the data collection of data from the user only to what is strictly necessary to perform a good service and deliver a good service. A typical example could be instead of asking specifically what the user's age is, ask for an age category, time brackets, or possibly asking for, in case of location data, a range of areas where they could be located and intended destinations. Furthermore, it should be allowed to users to withdraw and allow his or her consent to be forgotten. Let us now see briefly what are the documents through which ELISE has provided guidance on the subject of location data privacy. ELISE has a major focus on ensuring location interoperability and the alignment with the ISO Square European Interoperability Framework, the EIF. The studies that ELISE has conducted have dealt with all of the levels of interoperability covered by EIF and has translated them into a location perspective. This is shown, for example, here. The European Interoperability Framework provides a series of recommendations related to the underlying principles, the interoperability layers, and the conceptual model for integrated public services that are referred to into a location-specific framework, which is the EULF Blueprint. EULF stands for European Union Location Framework, which provides guidance under different focus areas to actually implement location interoperability. The EULF recommendation reflect and correspond to EIF recommendations, implementing them into concrete geospatial and location domain. The actual state of interoperability under the EIF is monitored by NIFO, which is a location interoperability, general interoperability observatory, providing a status of the general interoperability in member states by monitoring how are the EIF recommendations implemented in the various countries. This is reflected in the LIFO, which is the Location Interoperability Framework Observatory, which focuses specifically on location interoperability and translates the EULF into indicators that monitor how the location interoperability is implemented in the various member states. LIFO provides, by the way, indicators to NIFO related specifically to the geospatial domain. In terms of detailed guidance, the EULF Blueprint and the European Interoperability Framework do have related recommendations, as you can see here. In particular, recommendation 3 of the EULF focuses on location interoperability and data privacy, which corresponds to EIF principles, interoperability layers, and parts of the conceptual model. ELISE has dealt with location data privacy under different domains. ELISE has worked by providing studies, different studies, as you can see here, related to this aspect. Frameworks and solutions, such as the EULF Blueprint, and other material related to knowledge transfer, such as the Location Interoperability Framework Observatory. Specifically working on webinars and workshops. I'll briefly go through the EULF Blueprint and location data privacy here, pointing out, as we said, that the recommendation 3 is specifically focused on data privacy and provides concrete guidance on how to implement such recommendation for the different stakeholders. Here, I would mention the main artifact that ELISE has produced on location privacy, the guidelines for public administrations on location privacy. The goal of this document is to outline the key obligations that public administrations should comply with when handling with personal location data and raising awareness about the importance of location data privacy. It guides the reader through concrete scenarios that public administrations may face when processing personal location data. You will see there that the general structure of the document is very much oriented around concrete cases that match the user journeys that we've seen before. Briefly, the Location Interoperability Framework, the Observatory for Location Interoperability in the EU, shows that there's still work to be done in terms of preparedness with GDPR concretely related to location data. As you can see here, out of the 10 surveyed countries in 2019, only half of them declared to be fully prepared in all of these branches against location data privacy. The rest of the countries still show a long way to go somehow towards location data privacy. Location data privacy and digital government transformation is another key document that provides a conceptual framework for assessing the impacts of digital government transformation and shows how particularly key it is to build up citizens' trust, as we mentioned before, to allow citizens to understand how their location data is treated and for which purpose, and to convey and transmit their personal data for the use of data treaters, providers, and public administrations. Another interesting piece of work is the AI Watch, where it is shown how artificial intelligence can be used to analyze and treat personal location data, and how are the risks of using such advanced analysis capacity in dealing with personal data. There's also a dedicated page on JoinUp, the collaborative platform of the European Commission under the ELISE collection, to deal with all that is related to privacy in the geospatial domain. Let's now briefly talk about the impact that ELISE has had in the geospatial domain. ELISE has contributed to the methodological framework for mapping requirements under data protection and privacy legislation under the geospatial information and privacy report of the WGC, the World Geospatial Industry Council. And ELISE's work has been cited in many scholarly publications and presentations. Here you can see a few of them. Finally and quickly, let's now go through the key messages that we wanted to convey here. Common European data spaces and the interoperability coming with them become possible insofar users can trust, as we said, public administrations to respect data privacy and to keep companies and individuals generating the data in control. Data privacy is and will remain a major focus for all digital activities in the EU, also under the upcoming Digital Euro program that will replace the ISA Square program, which does not only engage member states to request citizens and businesses only once the same information, but also aims at allowing for interoperable, transparent, secure, privacy-aware and cross-border solutions deployed at a large scale to a large number of geographies covering different transport modes. Technological innovation in domains such as big data and artificial intelligence will also more and more change the framework in which data protection operates. This constitutes a significant challenge in order to assess compliance of such advances with data protection legislations, which needs to be made an integral part of solution development practices. The concrete implementation of the GDPR would significantly benefit from an approach where guidelines need to be explained in simple terms, as we said, and deployed in concrete use cases to increase users' awareness and the awareness of the operators working with personal location data. Finally, there are ethical issues to be taken into account in the use of technologies, enhancing the discoverability and elaboration of location information. Challenges can be summarized here under different perspectives. The peculiarities of location data privacy that we can see here, the characteristics that we mentioned of personal location data determining particular risks of the use of addresses, for example, as we mentioned. Furthermore, data stewardship can also be considered as a potential challenge because GDPR moves us towards a more open data definition of data, where it moves from data being owned by an organization to being under the stewardship of an organization. This means to start changing the view and language around who owns the data. The detail level scale of linkability of data is also a challenge because this means to achieve the maximum level of detail that is useful in producing data that is balanced against the protection of an individual's privacy. Public sectors also depend, as we have seen, on privately sourced technologies, and this also means being potentially affected by trust issues related to them. Policymaking and geospatial information also is key here because there are clearly increasing difficulties for lawmakers to keep pace with technological developments, and the awareness of public service providers is also key to address the possible lack of awareness of collection, processing of personal location data, and when it is embedded within the overall process. quickly further challenges here. The location data privacy in local and regional administrations is ever increasing as a concern, because smart cities and regional public services are requesting increasing amounts of personal location information. The level of implementation of the GDPR places particular implementation burdens on new technologies, as we've seen, and this is also an increasing challenge. Location data privacy implications for businesses and commercial data ecosystems consist in increasing and possibly infringing use of location data for customer profiling. This, for example, is related to the use of promotional information for promotional purposes. Big data has to be carefully managed to avoid unauthorized data profiling, for which location data constitutes critical information. Citizen-generated and volunteer data in GDPR also are critical, and it must be made sure that the purpose for which data provided by citizens are used is lawful and explicitly authorized. Furthermore, the increase of interoperability must be taken into account to take the transfer of data between different member states, these may have to comply with possibly diverging national data protection laws. ELISE has provided a body of knowledge that can be taken up by the Digital Europe program under different point of views, as presented here. There are different dimensions under which the future Digital Europe program can make use of the legacy of ELISE, providing indications on how to build the future axis of clean, sustainable, and smart communities and mobility initiative in particular. We have now concluded here, and we have now a question and answer space, and also a panel. Simon?
Yes, thank you very much, Massimo, Gabriele, and Ilenia Pia, for driving us through different aspects of location data privacy, presenting as well the main, let's say, concerns and in particularly interesting user journeys, as well highlighting also what ELISE has been done on this field. As mentioned before, we invited as well several experts today that would be able to comment, let's say, after this presentation, maybe their views, challenges, and potential future developments on this domain from different perspectives. So we would like to share with you the perspective of the member states, from the public administration, from business perspective, for citizen perspective, as well as the local administration perspective. So maybe to start somewhere, to break the ice, I would suggest maybe to look at the member states, so how, let's say, location data privacy issues and topic is seen from that perspective. How member states are ready. Are there gaps somewhere with something missing, expecting more? How at the end member states are succeeding on bringing down this, let's say, topic to the regional and local governance structure, for example, in the use of smart cities and places. So I think we have with us here Charlotte. Charlotte, are you here with us? Charlotte Weber?
Yes, I am. And yes, well, from a member state perspective and a public sector perspective, it would be nice to present myself, of course, and say, well, what is my contribution to this? And as a data protection officer, I'm dealing on a daily basis with a lot of questions from a practical perspective. And we have been in touch with other Nordic countries, other Nordic member states, in order to find out if we are aligned in our interpretation of the GDPR. And what we did find out was that, yes, in some specific articles, we find a common ground, but in others, it's very different because we are dealing with different kind of issues. We are having different kinds of products and services. So you have to go from actually the real world in order to actually get something out of the GDPR. You cannot just start with all the articles, looking them through, and then make a conclusion on what you have to do. You actually have to turn it upside down and be very much hands-on in your approach. That's what we have experienced. And especially in order to, you know, find common grounds, we have to actually explain ourselves. What kind of services are we doing as an address and mapping authority here in Denmark, compared to a similar one in Norway, for instance.
Okay, thank you. So mentioning the real world, I think yes, this is very much important, and therefore we've invited you as well, so to sharing the experiences from the real world. Maybe the next step we should turn maybe to the business perspective a bit. So we had on the ELISE action, on the work that has been presented already, some experts that were dealing also from the lot of experience with the business perspective. So implementation of GDPR and location data privacy, how is this seen from the business perspective? Is it enabler or blocker of the business perspective? Where were the, let's say, aspects of the competitiveness perspective? So how does it influence? Maybe Dara, if you could comment on that a bit.
Okay, can you hear and see me? Is that okay?
Yes, perfectly.
Okay. So first of all, very interesting and very good presentation. Thank you for that. Yeah, well, in business, I suppose, just from a purely business perspective, a private business perspective, private business would just see GDPR as a cost, and not necessarily contributing greatly to their bottom line, particularly in current circumstances. Now, it does have advantages in terms of if you're trading across Europe and intertrade within European countries, because it does purport to have a much singular standard. Now, it's not quite 100% there, but it's certainly much better than it was. It does present the challenge. It does present certain challenges and obstacles to doing things, where you can, which not necessarily a bad thing, because it's forcing you to think through your data program and your data management much more clearly, much more carefully, and it makes you really put the customer at the heart of everything you do, because you have to think of the customer requirements that are going to flow from GDPR. So from that perspective, it's good. It allows companies to maybe push, or certainly the data side of companies push through things that they've been hanging around for ages that nobody's done anything about, and forces everybody to understand where their data comes from, how it's to be used, and what permissions you have to use that, which was a bit of a tough ask at the start. And so there are good data practices that are embedded within GDPR that everybody should be doing anyway, and maybe just ignored, and maybe everybody has their housekeeping in order, or a little more in order than it was. But it does present challenges. So, for example, one of the things that was presented within the presentation on the persona, which I thought was very interesting, was about asking somebody for the consent. But what's not clear is how long that consent lasts for. Okay, it's not saying that the consent lasts indefinitely. It's not a perpetual consent, and you may have to go ask, even if it's for the same task, you may have to go back and ask for consent, further consent to continue to use. Now, that's not specifically spelled out in GDPR, but it's certainly becoming a question that's arising around it. So GDPR it's still very new. It's still, everybody really is still in their learning phases around GDPR about what it means in the real world. And Charlotte mentioned a very good word, and it was also mentioned in the presentation there, which is context. So every context is different, and every context presents a new challenge. And Another question that we're seeing that keeps coming up now is, okay, your data is anonymized, and that's great, but how useful is it? The granularity disappears, the usefulness goes down, generally speaking. And then the second question that comes up is, okay, I'm a data controller. When it goes over to somebody else and they mix it with other things, I'm not a data controller. You know, I don't have to worry about that. But there's a concern that as a producer of data or supplier of data, is there an implicit, because it's both direct and indirect in definition, is there an implicit obligation on me to keep watch of the market and what data sets are coming out to make sure my data set can't be mixed with another data set to reveal personal information? So it's creating a lot of challenges, a lot of interesting questions, but it has had also positive impacts. So it's not all negatives, but it's still early days, and it's definitely not the kind of thing that it's kind of introduced a layer of effort that businesses probably wouldn't be jumping up and down to receive, or any organization, to be honest, Simon. I just sort of stop there. Maybe that's enough, long enough answer.
Yes, sure. Perfect. Thank you very much for sharing this. To some of your points, we may coming back later on, particularly, as you mentioned, GDPR is new, so it refers also to the maturity and so on. But there were some other aspects mentioned as well. And we had a question here about the trust, trust, consent, and so on. So I think we should take into account here the citizens' perspective. So a bit as well explaining the active and the passive approach, in particular on the citizen-generated data, and trust and or distrust situation that is maybe related in particularly to the recent COVID situation, which is maybe impacting as well, let's say, trust or distrust of the citizens on the citizen-generated data. Maybe Anna, could you reflect on that, please?
Yes, good afternoon, everybody. Can you hear me well?
Yes, perfect.
Fantastic. Hello, thank you, Simon, and thank you all the speakers for this fantastic talk and discussion. I think, yeah, there are a number of aspects raised here, and one definitely is that of trust. And let's say this afternoon, I can share quite a different perspectives maybe from the others, as I've been working more on the proactive side. So the conscious provision of citizen-generated data to authorities to push them for action, especially in relation to environmental enforcement. So of course I have, let's say, also the pleasure of sharing experiences of very successful cooperation where the citizen really wanted the authority to use their data and process them and so on, but I'm also aware that it's not always like that. So I think one of the first aspects we may want to reflect upon is this paradigm of the active versus passive provision of citizen-generated content. And of course, we posit that when it's a sort of intentional provision of data, the citizen already has taken into account eventual risks and has also, let's say, agreed and consented on the use by the authority that is providing to. Yet, as the presentation stressed, the citizen may not have agreed to third parties to access this data. So for example, if the citizen is providing some data to the local municipality, they don't want a business to access them. So of course, it's important also to understand this one-to-one trust relationship. Then I think an important aspect is also to consider the balance on the provision and, let's say, what is given back to the citizen that is providing data. Because I think often we feel that it's not a mutual exchange, but it's rather one direction, either the citizen pushing the authorities, not listening to the citizen, or vice versa, a lot of information given to the citizen without a sort of feedback asked back. And we had the, let's say, the experience of collaborating with the water authority in northern Italy, and there was very much the authority caring about a sort of bi-directional flow of information, which also helped creating trust. So I think for the question of trust, I would say that before asking whether the citizen trusts the way the authority processes the data, it's important to ask whether the citizen trusts the authority in first place. Because in many countries, there's not really about the specific data collection, but it's a sort of diffused general distrust in the authority. And maybe lastly, I think it's important to nuance the discussion as also the concept of privacy in multicultural society that we live in is not so straightforward. So I think many local authorities should also consider that migrants community may have a different understanding of data justice, privacy, data fairness, and so on. And also on the application of the public interest clause. So for example, in the pandemic, we are seeing that many public health authorities are using citizen data without necessarily the consent there. And this is a public interest scenario. But of course, I think communicating this to the users, to the citizen is also really important. So yeah, I would say I leave it there in view of the time, but great discussion.
Thank you very much, Anna. You mentioned the local administration. So that's the one that citizens has the most interaction with. And it would be good to hear also the perspective from their point of view. So how they are trying to build a citizen customized public services and how this is related with the location data privacy and how they are using the privacy by design in developing their IT services. So maybe is still with us Gianluca from Florence.
Yeah. Good afternoon to everybody. Pleasure to meet you all, and many thanks for having invited us. Well, in Florence, we are working since several months on the collection and analysis of big data related to people presence. We started before COVID phase by analyzing data from telco operators to understand touristic flows and some citywide movements of population and some common usages of spots of the city. And then with the COVID lockdown, we were very much involved in collecting data from the public Wi-Fi network, used as a network of sensors, in order to derive the presence of people in several spots of the city. We are also now evaluating the usage of 1,000 video cameras in the city with video analytics for people counting and traffic counting. With respect to Wi-Fi, we have more than 2,000 public hotspots in the city, and we have proceeded, as you were mentioning before, with the privacy by default approach and by design, because we started by scratch, by anonymizing data, for example, by also deleting data set with less than n instances in order to be sure that it was not possible to deduce information of a single citizen. And we are also providing data on to the decision makers with anonymized dashboards. These data have been quite used during the lockdown because they helped a lot our deputy mayors and mayor in order to decide which parks or gardens to be closed. And now they are being used also because with the recent national decree, the central government asked the municipalities to decide which areas of the city need to be locked down during night, for example. So for data-driven decision, this data set and this work is being much useful. We also, of course, from the beginning, adopted privacy informative to citizens in the public Wi-Fi splash page. And well, we are working also on the metadata optimization. These data for the moment are only internal use, but we are working a lot with other standardization bodies. I see in this call we have Antonio Rotundo and Gabriele Ciasullo, which I am very pleased to meet, from EGID, which I thank a lot for their huge work, because in Italy now we have a very important reference point of standardization of metadata, starting from the Inspire Directive and with the national repository for geodata. And we are looking a lot on that work also for the standardization of our metadata. And hopefully we will also discuss with them regarding location data for this type of data set once we will decide to expose some parts of this data on the open data platforms, for example.
Thank you very much, Gianluca, as well, for sharing the perspective from the local administration. I think with this we covered a bit, as initially said, the real world, but coming back maybe to some points, so before to conclude, and to see a bit as well in the future. So we mentioned, so I think Dara, you mentioned the GDPR at the beginning. So how the maturity of GDPR? So where we are, so why at all location data privacy? So why not only GDPR? And also from the global perspective, how we can see it towards, let's say, other parts of the world, where we are with GDPR. Can we see it as a successful export product of Europe? So maybe Ray or Dara, could you comment on that?
I mean, I'm happy to come in if that's okay, Simon, Dara?
Yeah, fine, off you go. Well done, Ray.
Yes, I mean, I think Europe is a world leader here in GDPR, and Europe has recognised the increasing digitization and use of data, and what is happening in terms of impact on individuals. The rest of the world is in some ways following what we've been doing in Europe with GDPR. Europe has an interest in getting a level playing field amongst its member states, and that's one of the important factors. And I think that's certainly by multinational companies, that's seen as a benefit. It's also seen as a benefit by individuals in them having a greater control and greater recognition of what's happening to them. It's interesting with the COVID situation to see what's happening with the various apps, where in Europe there are guidelines from the Commission on the sorts of apps which are talking about voluntary use of data, anonymization of data, keeping data for limited timescales. And if you look at different regimes in different parts of the world, they have different cultures and allow different apps to help solve the same problems. And the issues here are very specific around location. So I think the COVID situation is provides an important illustration here. But it is early days on GDPR, and we will see with the Digital Europe programme and the setting up of European data spaces, the Open Data Directive, and what it will encourage, we will see more uses of data and more challenges in terms of personal data. It'll be very interesting to see the Digital Services Act, what that says about the platforms and protections of or personal data protections in the future. Mm-hmm. And as everyone uses more mobile apps and we see more use of AI and Internet of Things and facial recognition, technology will give us benefits in the future, but also continue to present challenges which will need to be managed. I think it's interesting times for us all working in this space. I would encourage everyone to look at the guidance that's been prepared. Certainly there's more detail in ELISE guidance than there is in the EIF, But I would also encourage people to look at the guidance that's now available from DG Justice and what they show on this. Certainly, ELISE guidance is fully aligned with GDPR and what DG Justice are saying. We give a location flavour to the issues, and we have some interesting depth on topics like anonymisation. So I would encourage everyone to consider this topic fully, and your presence here is welcome. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for this. I think before we conclude, maybe to the last question, there is some comment also from the audience. I don't know. There is Gregor. Would you like to present this live?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So I'm working in the geodata preservation domain for the last 5 years, and I've come across an interesting problem, which is that when the data is transferred to the archives, the laws of privacy change. We had an interesting problem when the National Bank of Slovenia would not transfer the numbers of accounts to the archive because the archival law just protects persons, I mean, people from finding out your health conditions and some political personal information, but not other ones. So in the digital age, the time for transferring the data to the archives used to be 30 to 40 years, but in the digital age, it's a necessity to do it faster. And for instance, in Denmark, they do it after 5 years of the record creation. And this change of the law, which, let's say, eliminates some safeguards provided by the GDPR, provides a rather greater possibility for the abuse of this personal data. So I think we need to take this into account, especially because even 5-year-old personal data can be misused in a way.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Gregor, for this intervention as well. Has anybody else from the public maybe would like to add anything before we conclude? Some further comments?
This is Dara again, Simone. Oops.
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
I was just looking at some of the questions coming through the chat box there, and one of them was, how do you build trust? And I think that's one of the positives that comes from GDPR, actually, is that it's within it is enshrined the idea of building trust. And really the way you do that is explaining very carefully and very clearly in plain English or plain language why you want my data, how you're going to use it, and how you're going to protect it. And trust is built up over time and lost very quickly if you fail to do that. So that's just one that came up there. And then have we closed the gates too late? And I think the answer to that is no, we haven't. I think the digital world moves so fast that no matter when you started, it's always going to be either too late or too early. It doesn't matter. And I think as long as we've started and it is protecting personal data, as one of the earlier speakers said, it will work. That gate is being closed slowly rather than quickly. The rules of closing are now available to us, but the actions to follow through on it are still taking a bit of time. And you know, we've seen in some of the presentation that the application of GDPR is varied across both countries and vertically as well. And that's really coming down to precedence and practice of how we used to do things or how we do things around here. And that's a cultural change, and that just takes time. So I think it isn't too late. I think it will work over time. And I think it is a very good way of building trust.
Okay, yes, of course. Trust is one of the most important things in this topic in general. So since we are 5 minutes over the time already, I think we can leave it here. So I think it was that today's webinar brought you so the topic of the location data privacy a bit closer. And it clearly showed that with this, we are actually, as was mentioned in the beginning, we started some process that most probably we need to some continuation, in particular to raise awareness in the public business sector and among citizens about these topics and challenges, and for sure to continue what has been started, in particular to bring down all these challenges, the recommendations and experiences also to the local and regional level. So I would like to thank all the presenters and all the, let's say, that contributed to the discussion. And let that be everything for today. And you are kindly invited to follow us in our further activities, in particularly webinars that we are preparing, and see you soon. Good, bye-bye.
Thanks, Simon. Thanks, everyone. Bye.